Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Sfarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Professor Yochanan Petrovsky-Shtern, who is the Crown Family Professor of Jewish Studies and a Professor of Jewish History in the History Department at Northwestern University, and is also a native of Ukraine and has written books about the Jews of Ukraine. I won here, The Golden Age of the Shtetl, A New History of Jewish Life in East Europe. Another book as well that's called Jews and Ukrainians, A Millennium of Coexistence, and a number of others. And we'll obviously be talking about the history of the Jews in Ukraine and the Jews in Ukraine in the current situation, obviously the terrible situation in Ukraine. So thank you, Professor Petrovsky-Shtern, for joining me.
Nachi, thank you very much to pick me up.
Okay, so first of all, I mentioned a little bit, just give the listeners a little bit about your background.
I'm raised and born in Ukraine. I'm born to a Russian-speaking family in Kyiv. I got my one PhD from Moscow University, another PhD from Brandeis University, and I was teaching comparative literature back then at Kyiv University in Kyiv in Ukraine, and now I am in Chicago. I am constantly in Ukraine. I am an honorary doctor at a major Ukrainian university, and I teach at Ukraine for last, I would say, 9 years on a regular basis. That is to say, I have access to Jewish communities in major towns. I talk to people, and I teach students who are interested in different aspects of Jewish studies.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, just to give a little bit of the historical background of the Jewish community in Ukraine. Obviously, we'll get to the current community and the situation. So first of all, just the origins of Jews in Ukraine, this goes back a very long time for people, those who may not know. So just briefly touch on that.
As any origin of a big and variegated community, the origin of Ukrainian Jews is variegated and diverse. There were Jews who were coming with the Byzantium migration northward, and they came to the Crimean Peninsula already in 8th, 9th century. There were Karaites, not really Jewish, but we need to mention them, who settled also in the southern part of Crimea in the 9th, 10th century. There were some converted Khazarians who are more myth than anything else, but we do have Jews of Khazarian origin in Kyiv in the 10th century, and there are documentary evidences to that. But of course, if we talk about Jews who are today in Ukraine, the, let's say, 99% of the community, these are the people who came with a eastward migration of Jews from Rhinelands, from the Arzot Ashkenaz, as they are called, mostly from Bohemia and Moravia, who settled in Ukraine, in what today is Ukraine, in the 11th, 12th century, and who really came to live permanently in the mid-13th century, when Polish kings invited Jews to settle and to be their colonizers in the very much depopulated lands after the Mongol invasion into the Kievan Rus. So the Ashkenazi community, the Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazi community, the values of which are based on very much Hasidei Ashkenaz, and the community that reports and talks to Hasidei Ashkenaz in the 13th, 14th century. This is the community that gave rise to the Jews that are today living there and who are descendants of those Ashkenazi Jews who came 700 years ago.
So I want to get to some other parts of Ukrainian Jewish history, but you did just mention, and we should mention here already, so the current Jewish community in Ukraine is mainly descended from those?
Correct. Of course, there are Jews who migrated. There are, because of the calamities before and after the collapse of the communist Soviet Union, there were Bukharan Jews, Jews from Samarkand and Bukharak who moved to Ukraine. As well, they moved to Moscow, to Russia. There were Jews from Kuba, which is a kind of shtetl in the mountains, the so-called mountain Jews, Edot HaMizrach, who came to settle in Ukraine, also as the result of the wars in the Caucasus. There were Polish Jews who were resettled, but basically we're talking by and large about Ashkenazi community. This Ashkenazi community can be Misnagdish, can be Hasidic of different versions. You have Belz Hasidim in the west. You have Sedagra Hasidim in the southwest. Bratzelmer Hasidim in the southeast, and mostly different types of Chernobyl dynasty, the Tverskys, in the center. But there are many others. There are dozens of others. Those Hasidim came back to Ukraine after 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, and many religious leaders came to Ukraine to start the communities anew, and they were doing kiruv of the very much atheistic-minded or kind of traditional-minded Jews who forgot everything about what they knew, but they could have been attracted, and they were attracted for the sake of building of the new communities. And you have quite a number of significant communities with the entire infrastructure in Chernivtsi, Lviv, Zhytomyr, Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa, and of course Dnipropetrovsk. These are just major centers, and some of them, if I start telling you just about these centers, will be mind-blowing. If I tell you that in Dnipro, which was the former Dnipropetrovsk, the Katerinoslav town, infamous for its 1881 pogrom, you have today a major Jewish center of I would say 18 floors, built as a menorah, as a skyscraper in the form of menorah, and everybody from Central and East Europe sends their kids to the yeshivas at that center, and it is headed by Rabbi Kaminetzky, who started things from scratch, and now he has the entire Jewish empire there. That is really mind-blowing. I spend time teaching at Dnipro on a regular basis, probably at least once a year. So I'm very close with this community as well as with some others. So Ukraine has scattered pockets of significant Jewish presence. Of course, most Jews in Ukraine are disaffiliated. They are not considering themselves connected to any kind of synagogue or religious life, but they do like to get parcels for Passover on the eve of Passover, and they eat their non-kosher chicken broth with matzah that they dip there. That is the reality that we are dealing with.
Okay, so I want to get more to the current Jewish community, but I just want to pull back for a second. Especially, you mentioned the pogroms, and there's been a number of obviously infamous anti-Semitic incidents in Ukraine throughout the centuries. The Tachvatat, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, and those that in 1648-49, and that I will refer the listeners back to an episode I did with that Professor Adam Teller and his excellent book about that. We can mention that you mentioned there's pogroms and blood libels, and obviously the Holocaust as well, and what happened there. So I don't know if there's anything you want to just briefly mention about any of those episodes, or
what I will say. I would turn us to a bigger question. There is a bigger question to address. Framework, pattern of reference. When we talk about Germans who are the perpetrators of the Holocaust and who are the masterminders of Holocaust, everybody knows that. This is not something that we can debate about. But everybody is comfortable with Germans. But when we talk about Ukrainians, whose role in massacring Jews in the Second World War, as the people, let me make sure you understand, as Jews as the people and Ukrainians as the people. When we talk about that, everybody is, for the reason unknown to me, absolutely confident that all Ukrainians are anti-Semites. This is a stereotype, and it is wrong as any stereotype. The stereotype of all Germans as Nazis or all Germans as normal after the Nazis, and the stereotype of all Ukrainians as anti-Semites just doesn't hold water. And I would like to invite you to think about what is going on in Ukraine after 1991. Once Ukraine is no more controlled, or I would say partially not controlled, or in most, in the biggest sense of the word, not controlled by the imperial Russian Soviet narrative, you have Ukrainians embracing Jewish issues. You have Ukrainian dissidents who are nationalists, who are coming to commemorate the massacred Jews in the Babin Yar on the 29th of September 1941. So these dissidents are coming to join the Jews who are illegally commemorating the victims in the 1960s, right, challenging the Soviet narrative and really stretching their hand to the Jews. So what do we know about Ukrainians? We know very little, and that is my point. We Jews know very little about who are Ukrainians, and we are clustering them as anti-Semites, and we do not want to hear anything about that. Open your eyes, folks. Okay, I'm Evin Yavin. Let's move on.
Okay, and just to further that, is that these interactions and relationships with Jews and Ukrainians throughout the centuries, is that your book, Jews and Ukrainians, A Millennium of Coexistence, that you co-author, that's available through Toronto University Press, is that what it talks about? And do you, because I wasn't able to get a copy of the book.
Correct. So I'm basically co-authoring the book with Paul Robert Magachi, who wrote 37 books about different issues of European history from the ancient times till today. For me, it's the seventh book, but it is the first book that we co-authored together, he and I. We are covering in this book economics, religion, art and theater, language, publications, history from the ancient times, from the beginning of the first millennium till nowadays, roughly to the Orange Revolution of 2014, and also the aspects related to the history of nowadays. What is going on between Ukrainians and Jews after 1991, after 1914. So we are trying to bring it to the moment when the book is sent to the publisher. And it is the book written for the general audience. It has the list of books suggested for reading at the end of it, but you can read it as a set of essays that cover different aspects of Ukrainian Jewish interaction. And of course, we start with something that is very important. Stereotypes. Ukrainian stereotypes about the Jews, Jewish stereotypes about Ukrainians. And we show that these stereotypes really match one another. And if we build our narrative, our discussion of Ukrainian Jewish interaction and Ukrainian Jewish history, any part of it, on the stereotypes, you just read the stereotypes and close the book on page 5. If you want to go beyond the stereotypes, go to page 6, please, and start reading. So this is something important that we are trying to present. If you take all the matters, all the periods of violence, of Ukrainians against Poles, of Ukrainians against Jews, of Tatars against Jews and Ukrainians and Poles and Russians, of Russians against anybody, and many other groups fighting with other groups during the Civil War of 1917-1920. You lump it all together, you will have probably 4% of 1,000 years of Ukrainian history and Ukrainian Jewish interaction. How about the other 96? Nobody wants to talk about this 96. So our book does not dismiss this 4. We are trying to explain how this 4 shaped the stereotypes, had a long-lasting impact, but cannot dismiss the 96. And we are showing the 96 too, and that is the bulk of the book. So I believe I'm giving you an idea what is in the book. I'm not giving you the ideas of the book, but I'm just telling you how the book was conceived and how it is built.
Okay, and I'll link to the book in the show's notes that listeners can check out the book if they're interested in purchasing the book and checking out more. It's
called Paul Robert Magachi, Yochanan Petrovsky-Shtern, Jews and Ukrainians, A Millennium of Coexistence. I suggest buying through University of Toronto Press, available on Amazon. The second expanded and corrected edition of the book, 2018.
Okay. And another thing, once we're talking about anti-Semitism and stereotypes, the president of Ukraine, I think everybody knows this at this point, Volodymyr Zelensky, is Jewish. And so the Ukrainian people elected a known Jewish president now. Right.
Let me make sure nobody makes any kind of a mistake. For Ukrainians today, you can be a Tatar, a Georgian, a Russian, a Jew. That really doesn't matter because you have a stake in the building of the post-colonial anti-imperial Ukraine. And Ukrainians celebrate anybody who is willing to help them do that. Let me just mention to you that President Zelensky is married to a Ukrainian Christian girl. They had their kids baptized. He is 100% assimilated. He comes from a Jewish background. His parents are Russian-speaking Homo Sovieticus. There is Homo Sovieticus is a historical sociological concept that conveys the idea of people who are absolutely integrated into the Soviet milieu. They are engineers. They know that they are coming from a small town, from a small shtetl in central Ukraine, but there is really nothing that clearly manifests their Jewish interests, except their except the fact that in the Soviet passport it was mentioned that they are Jewish on both sides, and that Zelensky is also Jewish. But I would question his Jewishness from you and my point of view, right? He's halachically Jewish, but he's not interested in that. It's important for the Ukrainians in general that a person who is ready to help them build better Ukraine would be welcome. And 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, when just Zelensky was elected, Ukraine had not only the president who was Jewish, but also Vadim Groisman, who was the prime minister, who was also Jewish. So except Israel, you do not have any other country that has at the same time Jewish president, Jewish prime minister. And I would like to ask you, can we continue talking about Ukrainian anti-Semitism? Yeah, we can probably, but that is good enough to show you what's going on. And you have Jews very active, very visible in municipal organs, as mayors of the cities, as leading politicians, as journalists who are the most visible journalists, poets, writers, and they are not acting just as Jews. They are integrated in a multicultural community. That is what is going on in Ukraine. Ukraine is not trying, as Mr. Putin, let he not be mentioned in the evening, Imach Shmo v'zichro, is trying to convince us that Ukraine is a country of the Nazis who are wiping out Russians and Jews and so on and so forth, and they are celebrating the Nazi perpetrators. It's bullshit from the beginning to the end. When Putin starts talking, I find lies in his commas and his dashes. So there is not a word which is true, but people listen to that. And they hearken, and what do you do with that? Well, you have to read books, you have to discuss things out loud, and you have to open a newspaper or, a website and see who is who in Ukraine today. What amount of Jews and people of Russian origin and people of Crimean Tatar origin are visible on political horizon today in Ukraine. And just let's move on.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about the community now. You mentioned a couple of major centers. Where are the major and just Jewish communities right now? And something else that you didn't touch on, maybe talk about, you did mention it, was how did these communities change since when the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991? How did things change since then?
Let me give you one example. Kiev, 1989. The community is mostly, 56. The community connected to one synagogue, which is allowed to function. It is supervised by the KGB. KGB has its stool pigeons who are reporting every foreigner who comes to the synagogue to pray there, or to bring books, or to talk to people. The community and the synagogue are situated next to the dorm of KGB. It's not an exaggeration. So the KGB can observe what is going on in the synagogue and who is coming to the synagogue just from the windows of their dorm, and people who might be willing to express their Jewishness, who might be willing to be part of the community, do not go there, because to go there means to be momentarily exposed to the informers of KGB who will report you. So the community is dying out. The community is not active, and of course, people who are real Jews in the community, the moment the Soviet Union collapsed, they momentarily leave. The Aliyah at the time is humongous. This wave of Aliyah of 1989, 1994 is the biggest Aliyah over the last 100 years. So this is what you have, and I would not even mention the rabbi of the community, because it's a non-entity. We do not need to discuss the person. 1991, Rabbi Bleich comes to Kiev. 1991, Rabbi Bold from current Stalin community comes to Lviv. Rabbi Glitzenstein comes to Chernivtsi. I said to Lviv. Rabbi Mordekhai goes to Lviv. Rabbi Wilhelm goes to Zhytomyr. Rabbi Baksht, the only Ashkenazi literature rabbi, goes to Odessa. These people start building things from scratch. In 2 years, they have a canteen for the elderly. They have regular shiurim for adults. They have small, start-up yeshivot for Baalei Tshuva, who are now really a dime a dozen. People come in hundreds to the synagogues to find out what this Yiddishkeit is all about. They have Chevra Kadisha that takes care of the kosher Jewish burial procedures, and they have lots on the cemeteries that are circumscribed by wall where Jews can be buried in a proper way. They have regular parcels and huge financial currents from the West that allow them to build up the communities. In another 2 years, you have local oligarchs who are coming to support these communities. For example, one of the heads of the Ukrainian airlines is one of the key supporters of the community in Chernivtsi. The Kiev community, we are talking about one community in 1990, but today you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 active synagogues with the communal infrastructure, with people associated with them, and quite importantly, with no problem with the minyan, right? So you go there, you do not have a problem with the minyan. People will be there to daven with you. So that is something extraordinarily important, right? So I'm not talking about what is going on in Dnipro, because to talk about Dnipro is to talk about things that are bigger than Kol Torah or Kol Yaakov in Jerusalem, in Beit Vagan. You go to a synagogue in Dnipro, to one of the synagogues any time of the day. If you go to Rabbi Schneerson's synagogue, you'll have there dozens, maybe hundreds of people who are sitting and learning. They have 3 minyanim in the morning, and each minyan has 100 people. So this is just mind-blowing what we have. And I would say that it's mind-blowing from my perspective of 1991, because I saw how these things were coming to life and built from scratch. But even more importantly, I would say this is part of the normality. This is normality. And this is what we have in Ukraine. Now, when I was in Dnipro 3 years ago, I was invited to speak to one of the sponsors, Ukrainian sponsors of the synagogue. I was whose mother is Jewish, but he is kind of absolutely Christian, and it doesn't matter. But he comes to the synagogue to celebrate things with Rabbi Kaminetzky, right? So I am sitting at the table with people whose name I would not mention, because these are multi-billionaires who are supporting the community, and they are normal people. They think, yes, it's okay to support the synagogue and not just buy yachts for yourselves. So that is part of Jewish normality that we can discuss. And again, I'm talking about significant communities in Dnipro, Kharkiv, Odessa, Kiev, Zhytomyr, Lviv, Chernivtsi. There is also another community which is mostly, I would say, settlers. They are not Toshvei Keva, they are Toshvei Araya. So dozens, hundreds, thousands of Hasidim who have permanent presence in Uman, right? Uman is basically today an Israeli shtetl. All streets in the center of Uman have Hebrew inscriptions. You want to go to polyclinics, you want to go to Sophia Park, you want to go to police. All the posts have the signs in Hebrew. And in the calm non-season period today, you have about 2,000 Jews permanently in Uman, right? And these are Moroccan Jews, these are Kippa Sruga, these are all sorts of Balei Tshuva from different parts of the world, people from Belgium. I saw there people from Holland and from England and from the United States. And yes, there are some Bratslaver Hasidim. But I'm just saying that it became a center with dozens of synagogues, with dozens of kosher places. And I don't know where Shechita works as intensively, probably not even in Williamsburg, as it works in Uman, when you have 29,000 Jews coming for 3 days for Rosh Hashanah. And it is just shigaon. But that is part of today's Ukraine. Of course, there are clashes with local population. Yeah, when you bring, some people from Amcha who are coming to have fun, and there are such people, and they do come to have fun. So when you ask why they bring 96 Anshe Mishtara, policemen from Israel, to guard what is going on at that time. And I saw that, firsthand. I was in Uman 17 times and probably 5 times for Rosh Hashanah. I know that, some people do not behave normally. And they like, enticing local population. So if there are clashes, it's also part of normality. I don't want to say that, Ukrainian anti-Semites are coming to beat the Jews. What do you have, 20 Ukrainian nationalists and 29,000 Jews, you cannot really beat them. It just, don't make me laugh. It's quite a different story. But it is, it's part of normality. Some people like to have fun.
Yeah, and we'll get to the question of how this conflict is affecting everyone here. I mean, obviously, Uman, Rosh Hashanah's way off. That's going to, I'm sure, this is an effect. But so let's talk about that right now. I mean, in the current community, you didn't give numbers on communities. I don't know if you want to just to give people an idea of how many. You only mentioned Uman, but also, the big question here. I mean, so how is this conflict affecting them? Of course, I mean, how there's a war, but I mean, how is this affecting them?
Right. Let me start with this. It's very difficult to count the Jews in Ukraine today, especially given the numbers of non-affiliated people. There are different numbers. Sukhnut counts according to Sukhnut, potential aliyah, and they are talking about more than 150,000. I think it's an enormously exaggerated figure. Other people give, conservative numbers about 75,000. I would say that about 95 to 98,000 Jews, less than 100,000 Jews, which is also a very significant figure in all of the Ukraine, would be a conservative estimate. I told you that most Jews live in bigger megapolitan and in the biggest cities of Ukraine. Now, how the war affects them, I would not call what is going on the Ukrainian crisis. It's not a Ukrainian crisis, for God's sake. Russia decided to bring the independent democratic Ukraine under its aegis. Russia is an autocratic regime where the president hasn't been changed for 20 years. The president who controls all the media, who doesn't have any kind of opposition of any sort, political, financial, military, and social, and who shuffled anybody who says anything against him, killed people or sent them abroad, let them be there. So this is what autocratic Russian regime is today. And Russia is trying to curb the Ukrainian drive for independence. And Russia is not really afraid. Putin is not really afraid of Ukraine being part of the of NATO. Nobody wants to discuss Ukrainian join NATO because Ukraine is not ready to join NATO. Putin says this is what is going on. NATO will be tomorrow in Ukraine. Let's stop it. The real concern of Putin is that Ukraine is becoming a democratic, multicultural, liberal, Western European country. And that pisses him off. And he doesn't want that to happen. He wants Ukraine to be a satellite. That's why he bases his geopolitics on this nasty myth that Ukrainian language never existed, Ukrainian nation never existed, Ukrainians are just part of the Russian people, and let's embrace them. And he comes with his cruise missiles, with his T-84, which is the most powerful Russian attacking tanks, with his Ilyushin 76 airplanes that transport 300, 400, 500 paratroopers. He comes with this to Ukraine to punish Ukrainian people for being willing to be in Europe. So what happens today in Ukraine affects as much the Jews as much the non-Jews. So therefore, that particular aspect we have to take into consideration. We want to say yesh v'yesh, you want to say, lehavdil, we want to say, maramar pligi, and other things that would tell us let's talk about the Jews, and everybody else is for dessert. That would be a major mistake. Jews are affected today in the same way, and they react in the same way as Ukrainians. And I'll give you 3 examples. Let's start with people who are trying to flee the country. Ukrainians and Israelis, Ukrainian Jews, were warned several weeks and several months before. Get out of the country. There will be a major conflict. My mom is sleeping tonight in the basement, which is the bunker bomb shelter of the school built in the times of Cold War. My mom is born in 1935. She saw the bombing of Kiev in June and early July 1941. She is 87 years old, and she is sleeping in the basement now under the Russian bombing of Kiev, under Russian shelling of the buildings, kindergartens, hospitals, gas stations, and houses. So you can imagine what's going on. The same with my mother-in-law, who is in Lviv. So I am constantly in contact with them. So I have, in addition to my ability to monitor things through the Polish, Belarusian, Russian, German, Ukrainian, and Israeli sites and sources of information, I also have grassroots information from the people who are in the shelters. So my mother-in-law is 100% Ukrainian. I would not go into the story, but bikitsur, right? My mother is 100% Jewish. So Ukrainian lady and Jewish lady in their 60s and their 70s, in the 80s, have the same fate. They were warned that they have to leave the country, and they did not want to leave the country. Why? Because they love it, because they want to be with their people, because they belong in. Number one. Number two, there are Jews and non-Jews who are defending today Ukraine. There are different types of people who are standing in lines. You think they stand in lines to get sugar, to get bread, to get medicine? No. Today in Ukraine, there is no shortage with anything except one thing: weapons. They are getting AKM-74, the modernized Kalashnikov machine gun, and they are getting that for free from the state that understands that it is a people's war. It's very much like Israeli defense, right? Everybody wants to be in the army. Everybody wants to beat the crap out of Russians who are coming to end up their independence. People stand very firm. And I have my friends who are from the Israeli yeshivas who are in the streets of Kiev defending Kiev. I have my friends who are 100% Ukrainians, who speak Ukrainian language and who are there in the streets. And I have my friends who are Russian Jews who are also doing the same, and they speak Russian language, but they are together with the first and the second group. So that is something to take into consideration. You have Jewish kids in the shelter because the city is bombed and surrounded by the Russian troops. You have Jewish kids next to them. So there is no particular difference.
Okay, so I think that was 2. You had a third reason?
Yeah, I wanted to give you more examples, but think about example number 1. Everybody says 2-3 years ago, including me, Zelensky is a showman. Zelensky is a standing comedian. He is no goodnik. He really is nishta her, nishta hin. Not for Russia, not for Ukraine. He's trying to kiss up to Putin, and he's not really a leader of the country. Okay, so there is a very severe critique, not unbased, not ungrounded, of Zelensky as a person. Okay, And I'm also saying that, I'm ashamed that the person who should have been, much more proactive and much with a better vision should not only, bring his skills as a showman to his presidency, but also some other skills. And suddenly, this person, in 24 hours, turns from, let's say, Sacha Baron Cohen into Ronald Reagan. You do not see this kind of a transformation. It's impossible, right? So it's beyond imagination. But that is exactly what happens. He puts on munition. He takes a gun. He is not leaving Kiev. President Biden calls him and says, Putin announced you the enemy number one of himself. And he is after you and after your family. And that has been announced on all Russian channels. He is after you. Let me take you out of Ukraine. What is the answer of President Zelensky? I need ammunition. I need weaponry. I don't need a ride. That is the answer of a mensch. That is an answer of a very different person. Of course, he would like to stop the battle. He called Putin 4 hours before Putin announced the war against Ukraine to tell him that he's ready to talk. There was silence in response, and Zelensky was saying silence should have been on the separation line between Russian and Ukrainian troops, not between you and me. But Putin was silent, right? So it is very important to take into consideration that he is ready to be a peaceful person. He is ready to sign peaceful agreements to stop the bloodshed, which is tremendous these days, right? Because the second army in the world is going against the people who are armed with machine guns and cocktail molotovs. And they are going against Russian missiles, tanks, armored vehicles, and cutting-edge measures to suppress any kind of urban unrest. That is something very important. And Zelensky is leading these people. And everybody says, we were critical about him. We did not like him. But what he does now, how he appears now, we are dealing with a different person. CNN called him, this is Spartacus of Ukraine today. That is probably very much true, because he's really leading a nation. And I'm proud that a person of Jewish descent, whoever he is, I was criticizing him for his half Jewish descent. Now I'm praising him. So it is an important change in assessment. But yes, I think that what he does now is extraordinary. And he's Jewish, right? And his wife is Ukrainian. Are they affected? Yes, they are.
Okay, yes, how you can answer. I was going to ask you that the question of just the broad question of why should we care, people, in the United States here, and I think you answered that, and you also mentioned that your mother-in-law, you have people there. So I mean, obviously they're sleeping in shelters. They're clearly affected. It's affecting, like you said, Ukrainians and Jews, and definitely a lot of the Jewish communities are affected, being shelled. So the question is that I think everyone's asking is, what can we do here? We're sitting here in New Jersey, in New York, you're in Illinois. What can we do to help?
Before I answer this question, let me tell you why should we care? Because this is a very important question. Ukrainians there are defending the democracy and the democratic regimes in Europe. The point is that it is absolutely clear Putin would not stop in Ukraine. Putin would say, oh, Ukraine, that's wonderful. Now let's control the territory that the Soviet Union controlled in the times of the Cold War. Putin is a person of the Cold War. He is comfortable in that environment. The first thing they asked him in 1999 when he was coming to power is, what is the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century? Do you know what he answered? Do you think the Holocaust? The Second World War? No, the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was his answer. And everybody laughed because everybody thought, oh, it's a good joke. The person came to fix the problem. Okay? He wants to restore the Soviet Empire and the influence of Soviet Empire on Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Eastern Germany, Finland, and other countries. And he is doing that very effectively and very consistently. And Ukraine is the first country that says you would not succeed. And it is done. So Belarusians were trying to do that. They were basically swallowed. It was an Anschluss of Belarus a couple of weeks ago. Georgians were trying to do that. They lost 1/3 of their territory. Kazakhs were trying to do that. The troops were removed from Russia to suppress them. Ukraine is doing that effectively. And these people today, Ukrainians today of different origin, of different ethnicity, are defending your and my values there. Okay, they are defending the values of the democratic world. That is something that we have to understand. Okay, the failure of Ukraine will be the failure of all of us, the failure of the European Union, the failure of the United Nations. Putin is threatening everybody. He is uncomfortable with the world situation, political situation. He wants to come with his geopolitics and tell as a bully what he's trying to do. And he is using his methods of a gangster and of a bully to do that. And he's also blackmailing the West by doing other things. So that is an important thing we have to keep into consideration. I believe I'm answering, big question. Now, what we can do? I'm ready to provide you with a list of websites. These are websites of the NGOs that have representation in European or countries or the United States. And these NGOs help children who need shelter, people who need medical care, people who need help and accommodation in the countries to which they were trying to leave. There were 45,000 people who left Ukraine in last days. People in Ukraine who need clothes because they lost their domiciles because of the shelling and of the rocket strikes against the civilians. So I can give you the list, and please send it to your listeners. And whoever can give $5 or $6, that's what I can say. And that will be one thing to help. Another thing is to contact the corresponding institutions, for example, the Congress, for example, your representatives in the local government, and of course, President Biden. Ukraine needs the United States and NATO to close the air. You need kind of an Iron Dome that Ukraine doesn't have. Ukrainian troops are effective because they are very highly motivated, but you cannot send a person with a Kalashnikov to fight the Russian jets. So Ukrainians ask President Biden, and I think it'll be wonderful if our listeners join them in that request. Close the sky. Close the sky from ballistic missiles that are hitting the houses, that are hitting kindergartens, that are hitting the hospitals. That needs to be done as soon as possible. Ukrainians will be able to withstand. And if they do, Nahi, you and I, before Purim, will see either the assassination or impeachment of Putin. Every day, every second that Ukrainians are standing up to the Russian aggression increases the chances that we would not see the bully, the gangster Putin at the head of the Russian Empire.
Now, what about, we can share those, the information, we can put it in the show's notes, but what about are there any specific Jewish organizations that can help the Jewish people in Ukraine?
I believe I also can give you contacts with Rabbi Glitzenstein in Chernivtsi, with Rabbi Bald in Lviv, with Rabbi Wilhelm in Zhytomyr, Rabbi Moskovitz in Kharkiv, and Rabbi Asman in Kiev, and Rabbi Kaminetzky in Dnipro, and Rabbi Baksht in Odessa. I'm ready to give you contacts with these people, ask them, and transfer money through the rabbinic authority, because I think it's also an effective way to help the communities. The last thing I think, Nahi, we are dealing with the person who promised his people, Mr. Putin, to start the war, to help the two newly created puppets of Russia, the so-called republics of Luhansk and Donetsk in southeastern Ukraine, to be controlled by the Russian Federation or by the Russian troops. In fact, he started the genocide of the Ukrainian people. He went against the entire country, attacking the country from south, north, and east. And it is very important for all of us to contact the International Court in The Hague and bring Putin as a war criminal. Putin is a war criminal and who has to be tried with his ilk in the criminal court in The Hague.
Yeah, and so first of all, thank you for joining me to explain this. I think it was very informative. I hope the listeners find it informative as well. And I hope, obviously, your family, clearly your mother, your mother-in-law, everyone stays safe, and everyone is continually davening for the community there. And like
thank you, Bezrat Hashem.
Yeah, Emir Hashem, and Amen. People will put up the links to. I'll put up the links in the show's notes that people can check out the links to various information. You'll hear to me, and I'll put it in the show's notes that people can check that out. And then just to go back to the historical aspect of Sfarim Chatter, the books, like I said, I'll put the link to your book, and also the Golden Age Shtetl as well. People can check out, and you have a number of other books as well. People just put in your name into Google or into Amazon if they want to learn more about the history of Ukraine and Ukrainian Jewish relations.
Thank you, Nachim.
Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure.